Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into the hidden art of connection. It's a journey that you'll see starts by looking inward long before we can ever hope to really truly reach outward. Think about it. We've got more ways to communicate than at any point in human history, right? We've got texts, DMs, video calls, and yet so many of us feel more disconnected than ever. It's this huge paradox. So the real question is, how do we cut through all that noise and find something genuine? To help us figure this out, we're going to lean on the wisdom of two thinkers who are, you might think, surprisingly connected. On one hand, we have Edith Schaeffer, who back in the 20th century created this legendary physical shelter for people. And on the other, we have Chris Scruggs, a contemporary theologian who's all about building a healthy inner shelter. And what's wild is, even though they're separated by decades, their ideas fit together perfectly to answer our big question. Now, both of our guides would absolutely agree on this one central point. The problem isn't that we don't have contact with people, it's that we don't have depth. We don't truly see them. And according to Scruggs, the path to fixing that, well, it doesn't start by looking out at everybody else. It starts by looking inward. So that's where our journey begins. Part 1, exploring your inner iceberg. You know that old saying, time heals all wounds? Well, Chris Scruggs comes along and says, hold on a second. He argues that time doesn't really heal all wounds. A lot of the time, it just hides them. They don't magically vanish. No, they get buried, pushed way down below the surface, where they still influence everything we do, often without us having a clue. And that's where this iceberg metaphor comes in. It's just perfect. The little tip of the iceberg that you can see above the water, that's our conscious stuff. The weaknesses we know about, the habits we see. But the massive, gigantic part hidden under the water, that's where the real action is. That's our subconscious. It's all the unhealed wounds, the unspoken family rules, the patterns we picked up without ever even realizing it. So what's the whole point of digging into all this messy stuff? What's the goal? Well, it's to develop what psychologists call differentiation. It's a fancy word for a simple, powerful idea, being able to be fully yourself, your own thoughts, your own feelings, while still being close to other people. It means you aren't just a pinball bouncing off everyone else's expectations and moods. You have a solid sense of self. So, okay, how in the world do we start this exploration? Scruggs says we have to start by asking ourselves some really hard questions about where we come from. Now, these are not easy, I'll tell you that. They force us to look at the family systems that shaped us. But getting honest about this stuff is the very first step to understanding what's really going on beneath the surface. All right, so once we start doing that inner work, we can finally and healthily turn our attention outward again. And that brings us to part 2, where we're going to see how this self-knowledge can totally change the way we connect with other people. Scruggs introduces this incredible idea he calls incarnational listening. Now, this is so much more than just being quiet while someone else talks. This is about being so present, so focused, that you actually enter into their world with them. You're trying to understand their feelings, to see things from their point of view. It's this act of total empathetic attention. And that might sound really intense, but it actually breaks down into some super practical steps. It all starts with getting rid of distractions. Yeah, I'm talking about the phone. Put it away. Then just pay attention with your whole being. You ask questions, not to argue your point, but because you genuinely want to understand. And then, the final step, you confirm what you heard. You just repeat it back. It's so simple, but it makes the other person feel incredibly seen and valued. So why does this matter so much? Because this kind of listening changes everything about a relationship. It's the difference between what the philosopher Martin Buber called an I-it and an I-thou connection. In an I-it relationship, we treat the other person like an object, right? A problem to solve, a task to complete, a thing to use. But incarnational listening, that creates an I-thou connection, where we see them as a whole, valuable person. And that is where real connection happens. So what does all this actually look like in the real world? What happens when a whole community is built on these ideas? For that, let's turn to part 3 and bring in our other guide, the amazing Edith Schaeffer. So here's just a quick look at her incredible life. She was born in China, but she and her husband Francis eventually ended up in Switzerland. And in 1955, they did something pretty radical. They just opened their home and started a community. They called it L'Abri. And the name they chose says it all, L'Abri. It's the French word for the shelter. It was designed from the ground up to be a refuge, a safe place. A shelter from what, you ask?
from the noise and the confusion of the world. L'Abri became this place where anyone could show up with their biggest, hardest questions about life, about God, about meaning. And they weren't handed a pamphlet with easy answers. No, they were met with honest conversation, a hot meal, and deep, respectful listening. It was basically an I Thou community put into practice.
Okay, so this brings us to our final section, where we're going to weave all of this together. We're going to combine the inner work of Scruggs with the community building of Schaeffer, and what we find is nothing less than the hidden art of living a truly connected life. Schaeffer wrote this landmark book called The Hidden Art of Homemaking. But listen, don't get hung up on that word homemaking. She wasn't just talking about curtains and cooking. She was talking about the art of creating spaces. Physical spaces, yeah, but also emotional and intellectual spaces, where people feel safe, where they feel seen and heard, a place where they can finally just be themselves. And this is it. This is the synthesis, the big takeaway. Real connection isn't just one thing. It's a two-part art. First, it demands the inner work of exploring our own iceberg, just like Chris Scruggs teaches, so we can become whole, differentiated people. And then, from that place of health, we can practice Edith Schaeffer's beautiful art of creating shelter for others. So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. In a world that just loves quick answers and loud opinions, what if the most powerful, most loving, most connective thing you could possibly build is just a shelter for someone else's questions? A space where their doubts are safe, their questions are honored, and they're seen not as an it, but as a vow. What might change in our world if we all just started there?